When our children are born, we expect to see them grow up, find their own path in life, and live it fully, and even have children of their own one day. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen for all of us. Some of us lose our children most unexpectedly, and it leaves us only with the memories we had made in the little time that we did have together. Today, my guest is Adrienne Hines, who has graciously agreed to tell her very recent story of loss and share her experience with us. Adrienne, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Yes, my loss is still very new to me, and for that reason, I still am very emotional about it, but I really appreciate the opportunity to be here to tell my story.
Thank you very much. And as I said, all emotions are welcome here. These are difficult conversations that we have sometimes, so please feel
Sure.
free to express whatever you're feeling.
Thank you.
So, can you start by telling us what happened?
Yeah. Well, I'll pull back just a little bit. I live living in the United States. I'm living, kind of what everybody would imagine the kind of life that you would live. Um I was raised by a single mom, but a very savvy, educated single mom. College and law school, those were the next things in my path. I was very committed to becoming a lawyer and these things that seemed like that's what I wanted to do. And I really went step by step right into a career that had been explained to me. It had been told to me it was something that I would really want, right? I'd wanted to be a lawyer since I was very little. My mother ended up marrying a lawyer, and so all of these things came together, and I went straight into a pretty high demanding career without giving a lot of thought to it. And
Mm,
along the way, I met a lawyer, married him, um, and he and I uh, built a little house in the suburbs, and we both went off and did our work every day. And we came back, and we had a very what I would think most people would think of as a somewhat traditional looking family in the United States. But all along the way, as a working mom, I had always tried to figure out what that balance was. What was safe, what was healthy for my children. I got pregnant, and my husband and I were extremely blessed. We were pregnant with twins, so we
mm,
had we had a little girl and a little boy. They were our only children, and I spent a lot of time with them. I took the first 2 years. I only worked part time. I took 6 months off, didn't work the first 2 years full time, part time, which is very unusual in the United States, I think.
mm.
And then I went right back into my career, trying to juggle and do it all. And I felt like we were doing the best we could with what we had. And as they started to get older, I began to really wonder if I had this balance down correctly, especially as we went through COVID and so many things changed, and began to see that, there's just a lot of other stuff going on. And I had a real awakening about my own career at that time. What am I doing? I get up and I go to work every day, and what am I accomplishing? What am I really trying to do? And not long after COVID, my husband was in a near fatal plane crash. So my husband um, fell out of the sky. He was a single pilot. He was the only one in the plane. But he had a terrible crash, and he was life flighted, and all the bones broken, and the brain bleeds. And it was a very horrifically scary time because all of a sudden I was looking at life very, very differently. And after his accident, a lot of the concerns that I had had about working were starting to resurface again, questioning, had I figured all this out? in the aftermath of my husband's plane crash, we learned that our daughter, who had just turned 21 and was in college, our daughter had developed a drinking problem, a pretty
Mm,
serious drinking problem in a pretty short time frame. And we had had some experience with alcoholism in our family. And so we kind of all hands on deck went to kind of, figure out what to do. And my daughter was a very strong individual. She ended up checking herself into rehab. She went to rehab and she came out of rehab, and we created a sober living home for her in our home. So she came back to live with us. And so after COVID, my husband's accident, my daughter's medical issues, and now she's sober and living in our home. That really all happened in a short time frame.
mm,
My daughter was sober for 10 months. We're very proud of that. It's amazing. Um, but more importantly, I got that 10 months with her. So my
mm,
daughter was living here for 10 full months at the age of 22, and she had just gone through it, rehab. She's one of the youngest people in rehab. She's going to AA down the street with all of the older guys in our community who, are 50 years old and going to AA, and she was amazing. Um and I was so grateful to have, she was going through a lot of change, a lot of introspection. Mom, I'm sorry about this. Mom, I really appreciated when you did this. She was just in a mode where I was getting a lot of information. We were having very honest conversations.
mm,
And um, sadly, on my birthday, July 29th of just this past year, 2024, our daughter had been struggling with what we thought was a kidney stone for about 12 hours. We thought she had a kidney stone. And um, we were a little irritated with her because she had had kidney stones before. And it feels like
mm,
she waited a little too long to tell us. She was suffering more than she should. So we took her to the hospital, and she was in a lot of pain. We actually had to take her by squad. She couldn't really walk out of the house. And um, when we got to the hospital, they informed us that she did not have a kidney stone. She had pancreatitis.
mm,
And it's something that I never really contemplated. I didn't, as a lawyer, I was an injury lawyer. I knew a lot about injuries. I knew a lot about a lot of medical things, but I really didn't know anything about pancreatitis. And that day on my birthday, her twin brother happened to be home, which was very rare because he had been traveling and he's in college too. And he happened to be home and he came to the hospital. Her father wasn't allowed to be there because he still was testing positive for COVID. So it was my son and I, and we spent the day with her in a regular hospital room watching the Olympics, watching, I can't even remember what we were watching, volleyball, I think, on the Olympics. And then visiting hours were over. And the nurses came in and said, visiting hours open back up at 10 a.m. tomorrow. And I said, so I can't like stay here. I can't like sleep on one of these bed things. They said, no, you're gonna have to go home. Because my husband, when he had been so ill, when he had been in the hospital, I'd been able to sleep in his room. And so I thought that was a good thing, right? I was too worried. I shouldn't worry like I worried with my husband. If they're sending me home, obviously it's not that big of a deal. And I went home, and my daughter went into organ failure. And they called us at 5:55 in the morning and said they weren't real clear about what was happening. They were trying to be clinical, and they said that they're having trouble getting a line in her, and they're going to have to intubate her, and they're going to do a line in her bone, and all this stuff sounded very outrageous. And they just said to drive quickly, but safely. And I'd never really heard anybody say that to me. Even when my husband's plane fell out of the sky, they didn't say drive quickly, but safely. And so I really began to understand that there was something big happening.
Mm.
And my husband and I got to the hospital. It was just he and he tested negative, thankfully, that morning. I'm not sure it would have mattered. He was probably going in that hospital anyway, but um, we both went in and literally as it was before the hospital opened, so security guards had to walk us up there. And as we were walking onto the hospital floor, we could hear the code blue being called. And so the nurses took us straight to her room, which I didn't even know you did that. I didn't know that's what people did. Um, we stepped into her hospital room, and it was a very large hospital room. And there were probably 15 or 20 people in this room. And there were two people performing um, CPR.
Mm.
And there were other people in the room doing other stuff, monitoring things. But I remember looking through the room and seeing a couple of young girls crying in the back of the room. And it took me a second, but I recognized them as it's a small community. They went to high school with my daughter. They work at the hospital as, in the food, or, they're young, they're still making transitions. And I just knew that this was really bad, because these young
Mm.
girls who kind of understood what was happening in a hospital room were crying. And I knew that they knew my daughter. So it was fairly evident to me that this was not going to end well. And my brain was really trying to grasp that. My husband and I were standing next to each other. It went on for a really long time. I walked away and came back a couple of times. And then the last time I was standing there, I think, and this is really what it all comes down to, right? I um I looked down at my watch. I remember looking down at my watch, and it was like 7:08. And after I glanced at it, I just started to lift my head back up, and I cannot explain all of the memories just came flying through my brain. And what was so noticeable about those memories, they weren't random. There were 1,000 of them, maybe a million, in such a brief period of time. But they were not random. They were not pictures of my daughter after she was born. They were not Christmas time pictures. They were not birthday pictures. Every single memory that came through my mind was a memory I had to leave work to see. I had to have left work to see it. It was the PTA, it was the tennis matches, it was the swim meets, it was the times I left to take her, treats to her classes. And I felt in that moment that um my brain was trying to tell me that I had done the right thing, that I was so glad that I hadn't worked any more than I had. I was so glad that I had had these moments in my life where I stopped and I peeled back and I said, what am I doing here? How much is enough? My husband and I had been having conversations since COVID. How much money are we really going to need? How much do we have to sacrifice? Because I'm tired of sacrificing for something
Mm.
I don't even know what we need. It was it was something that was I very clearly recognized it for what it was. Obviously, it was my brain giving me these messages. Obviously, I had some insight as to why my brain might be giving me these kind of messages, because it had been something that I had been so worried about, so concerned about whether or not I had been doing the right thing all along.
Mm.
But the part of this story that that I skipped over just a little bit is also important to look backwards on. And that is, after my husband's accident and then my daughter's revelation, or that she was struggling with alcohol, for the next 15 months, I before my daughter passed, I made a very conscious decision to leave my job. I had been a named partner in a law firm for 27 years. I've been working with my dad. I was a specialist in my area of law, and I didn't like it. I didn't like it at all. I didn't like what the practice had become. I didn't, even though I was a specialist and one of the most experienced and well-known workers' compensation attorneys in the state of Ohio, I didn't like it. And these conversations that my husband and I had after his plane crash, and as we were dealing with our daughter, were really conversations about, how do we change this life? How do we change this lifestyle? And the irony is that on June 30th, 2024, I walked away from my law practice. I walked away from my career, and I had 30 days. My daughter died 30 days later. So as I was standing in that hospital room, and as all of as this was happening, it had come at a very poignant time in my life in terms of changing my career. All these things had kind of been put in place for me to exit stage left and start something different. My daughter had been very supportive of that. She had really been there that 10 months as I was struggling to figure out what to do and how to leave my job and what I was going to do in the alternative. And did I have enough giddy up? Did I have enough self-confidence to do the things? And my daughter was there alongside of me. She participated in she was in the room in a few podcasts that I did, and she was just so excited about it. And I think that was my brain, and all of those memories, that was my brain saying to me, you did good. You did the right thing. You did the best you could with what you had. You have absolutely no reason to be ashamed or disappointed with how much you worked or how much you didn't work or how much time you spent with your kids. I just felt that if I was standing there, and I was a lot of other people I knew, some of my own partners, some of my own family members, I knew that if I was standing there in their shoes, that I might not have the same kind of peace, that
Mm.
I had because of the way that I had crafted my life. And I certainly hadn't done everything right all along, but the point to me was to continue to look at what makes life joyful and not the money. And it's hard because we can get caught up in the money. We need money, and we can like nice things, but at the end of the day, if you're standing in a hospital watching your beautiful child leave this earth, you're going to want to be able to say to yourself that you've done everything, that you don't have a lot of regrets. And I think that's the thing that I was most grateful for, is the fact that I didn't have a lot of regrets in that moment. And I think that's really the story that I take away from my daughter's untimely passing.
What an incredible story. And it feels to me like a call to action for everybody who'll be watching this, is to take that time, spend that time, and like you said, craft your life in a way where your children are a priority and where you are able to spend enough time with them. And it's uncanny, the timing of all these things and how it happened in your life, how it actually played out. Who would have thought all those things would happen? So it's a goosebump story, actually.
It really is. It's sad to be, it's very frustrating to be the person that has to teach the lesson. I will say that. But um I am I'm an incredibly empathetic person, so is my daughter.
Mm.
And I'm not shy. and I don't embarrass easily. And I do recognize that it's important to share these types of experiences
Mm,
because I know that a lot of people in my situation would not be in a position to be able to speak about this. And I recognize this. And I also understand that the rearview mirror is smaller than the windshield. We cannot go backwards in time.
mm,
And this isn't about making anybody feel guilty or anything. It's about seeing where you are in your life and being able to be intentional. I know that's a word we're
mm.
throwing around a lot these days,
Yeah.
intentional and authentic, right? But
Mm,
it's about making very clear choices about what it is you want for your life, right? And saying to yourself, how much is enough? At what point do we draw the line? Most of us go to work to provide for our families. And
mm.
so we lose that sometimes. And providing means spending time with them too. So
That's right. And we need to provide materially as well. So that that decision or that finding that balance is sometimes very difficult, sometimes very challenging for us as parents to find because the pressure is on. And sometimes we are single parents,
yeah,
sometimes, circumstances are difficult, or you mentioned your partner had a plane crash. I mean, what a horrid experience to go through as well. So
yeah.
there is this, the normal things of life is stressful at the best of times. And then when you have these kind of experiences, there's just so much more pressure on us. So it's difficult to always maintain the balance if you manage
I,
to find it.
I also think that it's really I want to be sure that people who are listening, um, men and women alike, but particularly women, because we do bear a lot of the soft responsibilities in the family that take up a lot of work. I think it is easy for us to get very bogged down in
Mm,
in our guilt, right? And I
mm,
don't want this to come across as anybody should be feeling guilt about not being there, because it is about trying to figure out what you can do in your lane to spend the time with your kids. If we all have to make money, we all have to,
mm,
we all have some aspirations, we all have dreams and hopes, and all those things have to somehow meld into loving and raising our children,
mm,
to be kind and intellectual, right? But I have hopes and dreams. I have to find a way to find outlets for that. But it's all, we got to give up things that we don't have the time for if we're
mm,
taking time away from our family.
mm.
If it takes
Definitely.
time away from our family, it's one of the things that we need to consider changing. And
Mm,
so it's not just work, it's work, it's the after hours, it's the parties, it's the research, it's back at the
mm,
hospital for round, it's a lot of different stuff.
mm,
And so it may not be work that you can change, but what around you can change so that you can make this time, the time for your children, time for your family.
mm,
My husband and I have been very, very strong throughout this process.
mhm,
Um, I don't know what life would look like if he and I had not been, consistently working on a strong marriage all along here. I mean,
mm,
we have the tremendous misfortune of having a nephew who died at the age of 24 from alcoholism. He actually
mm,
died of alcoholism at the age of 24. And so we watched his parents
mm,
fall apart and get divorced, and um that would be just another tragedy on top of a tragedy here. So my husband and I are both working really, really hard to stay on close as possible to the same page, and making
Mm,
sure that your marriage is strong so that when bad things happen, you do have a support system. These are the things that matter. We don't always think about that when we're getting
mhm,
up and getting ready for work, but yeah, it's the whole experience that matters here, and being thoughtful about it is something that I think is important.
mm. I'm so glad you mentioned your relationship with your husband also, because at Get Up and Grow, my focus is always on how we can cultivate resilience on a daily basis as part of our lifestyle, consciously do it in all aspects of life. And we don't know what the future holds for us. So we need to work on our relationships and our partnerships, our marriages, our intimate relationships, our friendships, our work relationships, the relationships with our children. We need to cultivate that resilience in the relationship consciously all the time so that when the tragedies hit us, we have a strong foundation, we have a strong bond, we have something that we can rely on to carry us through the difficult times.
It's funny that you say that. I was smart enough to have started seeing a therapist
Mm,
before my husband's plane crash. It
mm,
was actually my son uh, um, who was having trouble. He's like, "We don't communicate, Mom." So I decided to go to a therapist to try to figure out how to communicate with him better. But the advantage that I had is I had a therapist in place when my husband's plane crash happened, and and she got me through that. And the following summer, I had left my job on June 30th, and my daughter passed away on July 30th, and I had a therapy appointment July 17th, right in the middle of that. And I remember sitting in my therapist's office because she had really been working with me to break away from my firm, right? To go off and do my own thing as I had been talking about for years. That's what she was working on helping me do and communicate with my kids. And when I went in for that appointment on July 17th, everything was going great. I had
mhm,
just left my firm. They had just paid me. I had my new life and this new world and this new fantastic stuff I was turning towards. And I had just made a business deal with a guy that's moving my private business forward. And I remember sitting in her office, sitting in her chair, that chair that's so familiar. And I said to her, I said, "I just feel like things are going so well, you know? Scott's fully recovered. I got a business partner. I left my job. My social media is doing great." I said, "Just feel like, shoe's gonna drop, like something bad's gonna happen."
oh,
And I remember saying it in more of a light tone, right? Like just like I did like this. And I remember my therapist, she was packing up, she smiled, she's packing up, and then she stopped and she put everything down and she looked at me and she said, "Wait, wait, wait. You need to stop for a moment." She said, "Here's the thing." She said, "Bad things are going to happen. Just because good things happen doesn't mean that's why bad things happen." She said, "But
mm,
bad things are going to happen, and they're not going to have anything to do with this because
mm,
that's life."
yeah.
And I remember walking out going, "Oh, yeah, I mean, like, that's true. That's true." And then 2 weeks later, my daughter passed. And I remember thinking, that conversation was the thing that came to me
Mm,
as soon as I was able to get my wits about me, and I walked down the hallway and back to the grieving parent area. I reached down and I texted my therapist, and I remembered she had said to me, "Bad things are going to happen, but it doesn't mean that it has anything to do with this." And
mm,
so that was just a very timely comment to me in my world that helped, I think, in that moment, make
mm,
sure that I didn't hate the choices that I'd made. Like I was afraid that I would be like, "Ah, I went off on my own and this is what happened. It's all because
Mm,
I went off on my own," you know? And I was so grateful that she had said that, she had planted that in my brain so I could still be optimistic about it, so I could still be joyful, so I could still keep it as something that she helped me do and I'm working towards it. So that was very, very insightful, and I do think that it is important for everyone to hear that just because things are going well, that doesn't mean that when something goes bad, it's because they went well first.
yeah.
It's just the way that it is, and
It,
having that support around you, that's what matters, and you come
mm,
full circle to why it's so important to have people around you because they're gonna be the ones who are there when the floor drops out,
mm.
and you're gonna need your people, and you need to be on good terms with your people when that happens. So
Very, very true. I love that you said you were smart enough to get a therapist. That is something that many people are afraid to do, and there are a lot of, stigmas and beliefs around that. It makes it difficult for people. So I love that you said you were smart enough. And
oh
it's
yeah,
part of the people that we surround ourselves with to support us when we
yeah,
need it. So
absolutely.
I'm so grateful that you had that in place already. And what an incredible experience and sequence of events. It's almost as if you were prepared for what was coming. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's quite strange the way things unfolded, and
Mm,
even today looking back, it's even more strange the more I look back and think about it. At the time, it just felt like that's just what's happening, but I do start to see how odd it how
mm,
just apropos a lot of things were. I mean, I hate to say that because obviously I wouldn't have ever wanted to think that things were in place for my child to leave, but
mm,
it was just I was very grateful I was in therapy. I was very grateful my daughter was sober. I was very grateful that I had those sober time, months and months of sober time with her,
mm,
and all of the conversations. A lot of people lose 22-year-old children, and they don't have the same kind of peace that I have about it.
mm,
They,
mm,
and I feel exceptionally grateful for the fact that I have a bit more peace, about how everything unfolded because it's just so hard. I can't imagine,
mm,
how hard it would be to have not been in a good place with her, to have been arguing with her, for,
mm.
somebody to call me and tell me, she died in the hospital and you weren't speaking. I can't imagine. I can't imagine that. That would be terrifying. That would be terrible. That'd be a terrible hell on earth for me.
Yeah.
So I'm just here to say that, apologize, do whatever you need, tell them that you love them because, yeah,
Just don't know.
you just
Adrian,
don't know.
you lost your daughter on your birthday
I took my daughter into the hospital on my birthday, and she died the following morning.
next morning.
Yeah,
Wow,
yeah.
wait a day.
So no, not a big fan of my birthday anymore. And but yeah, that's the way it worked.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, can you tell us a little bit, first of all, tell us what is your daughter's name?
My daughter's name is Zoe.
Zoe. Okay.
Zoe Yvonne Hines. Zoe Yvonne.
Okay. Beautiful. And her twin brother, what is his name?
Avery.
Avery.
Avery Scott.
Avery Scott. How has this impacted him? And I'm asking also because I'm one of a twin. I have a twin brother. So it has a maybe a special meaning for me being one of a twin. Can you
Yeah.
tell us a bit about how this has impacted your son?
I get that question a lot. And it's hard because he's 23 and he is in therapy. And he's not the most chatty individual I've ever met. So um I I guess I would say he's handling it as about as well as you would expect.
Mm,
He tried to go back. Both of my children were in college. They, my daughter had taken her or her senior year off to go to rehab. So she
mhm,
still had her senior year to do yet. And my son, they had started during COVID. So my son had started in an honors engineering, and then after a year wanted to move to something else. So he was a year behind. So
mm,
he still had a year to go. And when my daughter passed away July 30th, my son had a very a long-term girlfriend. They'd been dating for about 2.5 years. She was very good and loving and kind and helpful to him at that point. She was living in the town where he was going to school, so he went back to college. Something that I thought was maybe not the very best idea, because we're only talking about 4 or 5 weeks later.
mm,
And but he went down there and we tried to keep a really close eye on him. He was only about 2.5 hours away. But it was pretty clear that he was struggling. And the week before Thanksgiving, he called to say he's on his way home, that he had broken up with the girlfriend and that he was leaving school for now. And that was a bit of a surprise, but not really. The girlfriend thing was quite a surprise, but he's home now, and we're all just trying to regroup to figure out what the next steps are. So
mm,
I would say that, 4.5 months out from this, we're still very much in the thick of the deep
mm,
emotions and figuring out what to do next. But he's home and he's close. He's with us. He's in therapy. He's got a really core group of friends. We grew up in this community, so he's got friends from kindergarten up.
mm,
Many of them, still work in this area, and they've kind of put their arms around him, and he's just taking some time to figure it out. But it's confusing, and it's
mm,
scary, because all of the people in his life think that he should be getting his college degree, when
mm,
his mother and the people very close to him recognize that he needs some healing time. So that's where we're in. We're just in healing time. And I think that I think we're all doing it as well as we know how, with the tools that we've got. So I'm appreciative that my son and I see a therapist.
yeah. And the thing with grief is that we all grieve in our own unique way and in our own time. There is no timeline or deadline or, recipe for doing it. We all do it
Right.
in our own unique way. So, and we need the space and the grace from the people around us to be able to go through whatever it is we need to go through.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think that's hard if you've never experienced grief like this.
Mm,
It's like being in a foreign country, you know.
mm,
It's like you don't know what the rules are, you don't know what's
mm,
supposed to happen. I remember I got very worked up and anxious over the funeral home saying that, it's customary to write thank you cards for all the
mm,
flowers and everything.
mm,
And I remember they said that, the day after my daughter died, as I was sitting in their offices, but a lot of it didn't really connect with me. And after it was all over, I reached out to the funeral home and I said, "Did you say that, like, I'm supposed to write a thank you card for all of these flowers and everything?" And they were like, "Yes, that's what's customary." And, I've got this tote bag from the funeral home, has everything in it. And I can't, even today, I can't even open it up, much
mm,
less write thank you cards. The
mm.
thought of writing thank you cards is so outside of my wheelhouse that
Yeah.
I couldn't even understand that that's what people expected me to do. And so
Mm,
I went to my social medias and I said, I cannot. I love you. Thank you for the flowers, but I cannot sit down and genuinely say thank you for something I didn't want, you know?
Mm.
And everybody in my community understood. They were like, we don't want one. And so
Yeah.
I really took to one of the things that I had noticed is that I was being very open. I was talking a lot about what was happening. I was
Mm.
very clear when she passed away. I put a message out and I was very authentic. I left my job. I left my upstanding career as a bankruptcy or as an attorney in a law firm to have my own private practice in bankruptcy. And I'm a bankruptcy law influencer on the internet. That's what I
Mm.
do. I go onto the internet, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube accounts where I talk about bankruptcy law.
Mm.
So that's really what it is I do. And I leaned into, I very much enjoy coming into people's space and trying to help them figure out what to do next. So I think it's just a very natural ability for me to talk about things, talk about what's happening, talk about how things are unfolding. And I got some feedback from people in my community that they genuinely appreciated me saying, hey, listen, today, today, please don't be ashamed. Please don't be embarrassed to come up to me. Please come up to me and hug me. Tell me a funny story about her. Please. And I'm trying to encourage people to come into me. And then a couple weeks later, I put one out and I said, right now, I'm not going to speak for my family, but it's really hard to mention her name right now, right? And
Mm.
so people go to my Facebook just to kind of see how things take the temperature sometimes in our home. I just feel like the people around us have been extra informed, right? I've kept them extra informed about what's going on because of my willingness to to tell
Yeah.
everybody what's going on. I'm a sharer. I'm an oversharer. Some people would say I'm an oversharer, but I would say that I'm just a detail person. I like
Yeah,
to I like
I
to
think it's so valuable because for most of us, it's difficult. It's difficult for anyone to talk about this sort of thing, and for most people, it's almost impossible to.
Yeah.
So those of us who are able to speak about and comfortable to share how we feel and what we experience, it's so, so valuable because it helps other people to get a glimpse into
Yeah.
happens and the process and the things that you go through, and it's confusing and it's painful and it's scary and all those things together. So it's very, very valuable if you are comfortable to let people in a little bit and share it. I think I really, really appreciate your openness about it because I think we can learn so much from you. So thank you for that. Again, I have to acknowledge that I think you're making a very valuable contribution by sharing this.
Thank you. I don't there's nothing that would stop me from sharing it. I'm not um embarrassed or ashamed and about anything. One of the tenets of what I do in my regular life is I take shame and embarrassment away from the discussion of debt and money. That is what I do. And I
Yes.
know I'm very aware that shame lives in darkness.
Mm.
And um, my daughter was, um, I was I was in talks to be on a national television show.
Mm.
And those talks were occurring in June and July before my daughter passed away. And my daughter was was very involved in those discussions, right? Like she was there and she got to have those discussions with me. And I was it turned out that I I I did not end up being chosen for that program, and it was a really good thing because I would have been filming when my daughter died. So
Mm.
another little apropos thing that happened there. But yeah, I don't have any problems sharing who I am or what I do. And I want people to see that you I think one of the most difficult things is isolation.
Yes.
It's the isolation. It's And so for me, getting ahead and telling people, hey, if you see me out at the grocery store, it's a good day for me. It's a good day. Let's,
Mm,
come up and talk to me. I'm trying to do that with people so that they do know what to do.
mm,
But shame lives in darkness, and it's a concept I talk about a lot. And it's a concept that resonates really with you here. Nobody is without shame or embarrassment or guilt
mm,
when something bad happens. Even when my husband's plane crash, I thought, God, what would have happened if he would have died? You start blaming yourself? I should have never let him take those pilot lessons. I should have done this. I should have made them do this. I should have bought him that thing with the GPS. You just shame and guilt can eat
mm.
away at you, and it
It
can
does.
truly destroy your ability to look forward.
Mm,
And so talking about it and putting it out in the light, I don't have any problems doing that, because I recognize how important and how dangerous it would be to spiral alone without support.
oh, yes. Oh, yes. Yeah, and the importance of finding the things that we can be grateful for in the experience and the time that we had together with the loved ones is valuable because that carries us through.
Yeah.
So for me, very much a part of being resilient is to look for the things to be grateful for, name them and acknowledge those things. But talking about your husband, how is he doing?
My husband is doing very well. My husband is 18 years older than me. And
Mhm.
so I am, as we sit here today, I'm 53. And my husband just turned 71. So he's 17 and a half years older than me. Um, but he's almost fully recovered from the broken bones and the stuff, but it slowed him down a little bit, right? I mean, he was 71, he broke 9 bones and 3 vertebrae. So he's doing extraordinary. You wouldn't know that he was in a plane crash, but as his wife, I could see he slowed down just a little bit. But other than that, he's doing
Is he still flying?
no,
Not.
no, no, no. He um after this crash, he was like, well, I did it and I survived, and now it's time to move on. He's not going to look the gift horse in the mouth. He feels very
Yeah.
fortunate that he walked away from that. The problem is that pilots mostly lose their licenses in their 70s, and his plane was totaled. So to find another one would have been a big hassle, and he wasn't quite ready at the time. And now they've gone up in price, and he would have to maintain his medical, and he's not sure he could
Mm,
maintain his medical for very much longer. So getting back into the hobby would not be wise. And plus, I said no.
yeah.
No, I didn't say no. When he said no, I was like, okay, good. And I made him stay. I made him
Yeah.
hold no. I didn't make him say no. I made him hold on to no.
Yeah.
Didn't let him
Very
change his mind.
smart move. Adrienne,
But
it's been such a pleasure chatting to you. And again, I need to just express my gratitude and my deepest sympathies
thank you.
with you and your husband and your son and your family for your tremendous loss. Um, it's it's something that we all go through on our own, and there's not really anything someone can say that makes it better. We could just walk alongside you, and I'm grateful for having met you and for having the opportunity to walk alongside you for this part of the journey. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Can
very
I
much.
can I ask you for a final thought, some golden nugget of advice that you can give other parents who find themselves in a similar situation?
I think I think the clearest and most poignant thing I can say is look yourself in the mirror.
Mm,
Just stand and look yourself in the mirror and ask yourself if you like what you see, if you like who you are, if you think your children are complete with what you're doing. I mean, I think the true test of who we are is what we see when we look at the mirror. What do we tell ourselves? If you look in the
Mm,
mirror and you tell yourself, you know, my kid's just fine at daycare. My kid's got a nanny. My kid's got I got to go get some work done. Then you're never going to listen. You're never going to listen. You're
mm,
the one that has to look in the mirror and say, am I really doing everything I can the right way? If if I'm standing in a hospital room 7 minutes away from my child being declared deceased,
mm,
am I going to have beautiful memories that make my heart say thank you? Or am I going to have hatred or anger towards myself for the decisions I'd made up until that point?
mm.
That's that's what it felt like to me.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Important stuff to think about.